What's going on, guys? Mike Tierney here with Princess Auto. Welcome to Tech Tips with Mike T. We're talking about small engine accessories. So you've got an engine, you kind of need to accessorize it. So we're going to kind of split this up into a couple of categories. Components that are accessories that are bolt-on versus maybe some of the maintenance side of things. So first off, when you're selecting your engine for whatever application that is, maybe you need some driveline components. So whatever it is on say a go-kart, you want to trick that go-kart out with, maybe a clutch kit. So at the front of the bench here, we have a PowerFist engine, just a small 5.5 horse engine. And I've just kind of bolted on just to kind of give you a visual of what a clutch kit could look like. So it has a belt and a couple of clutches inside. And basically it works similar to, if you know how a snowmobile works, it's a centrifugal clutch that kind of just spins, and it'll be on springs and it'll tighten onto the belt and then start your drive. When you go down to idle, you'll stop moving, disengages the shaft even without having to turn the engine off. So it's a great support component. It may not be something you always need, but I would highly suggest getting one of these for a go-kart application, because it gives you all kinds of neat options on tuning that a little bit more to precise drive modes. So clutch kits, they come in a few different sizes. Kind of just have to be careful on the maximum motor size. So the maximum limit of that torque clutch kit may not fit the shaft that you're looking at on your engine. So you want to just make sure that everything is going to mate and that the engine isn't oversized to that size of torque converter kit that you're looking at. Now, on the flip side, if you're looking at trying to reduce the speed, still develop the power that you need out of the engine, that horsepower at full RPM, you may need to go to a gearbox. So this is a 2-to-1 gearbox. There's a few others. This is just one that we selected. Basically, it's got an output shaft. If we flip it around, it has mounting bolts to mount directly onto the shaft coming out of your engine. And it's got basically a case. You do need to add oil when you've fully installed this. This takes 30 weight or 10W30. Just refer to the manuals depending on the supplier. All that information should be in there. So you do have to add oil. Inside is another kind of slip clutch plates, and what it'll do is it'll change the ratio from a 2-to-1 on your output drive. So if you do have to have the power, but slow things down on the drive side, so if it needs more torque, then definitely a 2-to-1 or other. There's 6-to-1s out there. There's many others. Those are also options when it comes to your driveline components. Now, if you're not going with anything too advanced and you still want to have a clutching mechanism, we've got a couple of options. So these are centrifugal clutches. So spinning outwards, there's springs, they grab a hold and they will start to engage at a certain RPM. That will be dependent on the type of clutch that you're looking at. They're typically available in 2 options. So you have, if you choose to go with a gear set, so on the front here, we have a gear set that would go from our mounting it to our engine shaft to a set of gears to the drive line of your equipment. And you also have a belt option. So if you choose to go with a belt, it uses a V-belt option, and they're typically specific to the type of belts that you're going to be looking at, whether it's an A series or B series. So these are just slip clutches or centrifugal clutches, and they usually have a keyway inside that will mount so they don't just freely spin on the shaft, and the keyway will stop that from spinning. You do need to add typically a washer and a bolt to the front end of the shaft on the engine to stop that from sliding back and forth, but that's all available through Princess Auto. So keep that in mind. There's no set screw on these, and you do kind of want to make sure that they don't come flying off. So be prepared to have to have a few other little options when it comes to adding clutches to your gas engines. We're going to shift over to some of the maintenance accessories. There's a wide variety of them. We've selected a few that are kind of the most common, but you can get rebuild kits for pretty much everything that we carry, whether it's a parts order or directly in the store. So let's start with the easiest stuff. So air filters. So we got an air filter. They come in many shapes and sizes. This one's here for a Honda. You'll find that it might be a cartridge style like this with pleating in the filter itself. Really, this is just going to protect your engine from that debris entering your intake and causing issues within your combustion chamber. So it usually has a foam pad. Depending on your amount of debris or where you're working in your environment, if it's on things like construction equipment like concrete, or when it may be lawnmower activity, lots of dust. Some people will even take this foam pad off and just put a slight amount of oil. You don't want it soaked. They'll put a little bit of oil in, engine oil, and wring it out. You don't want it soaking wet because that'll damage the pleating, and then that'll actually help prolong that filter. It'll capture more of that really, really fine particles. And there are filters out there and engines that actually have these submerged in oil baths to help prevent any amount of debris getting into the engine. In these cases, these are just basically a dry filter, and you just have to watch them. If this is clogged, your engine's not going to breathe properly. You could get hesitation, lack of power. So it's really simple. You're just going to undo the wing nut that's on the housing. So in this case, on this engine over here, we have a airbox housing. There's just a wing nut, and you just remove that. Just go in and inspect it. Sometimes if it's just loose dust, just take a blowgun, go from the inside out, and air blast it off. Just make sure you're wearing safety glasses. If it gets really intense, they're not expensive. Replace them every now and again. The manufacturers will have specific times that you suggest that you should change them, but let's be realistic. Just do some inspection a couple times a year. Make sure that you've got a nice clean filter, and they're not hard to install. They're really, really simple. As we get into more maintenance, obviously when it comes to the fire side of an engine, our spark plugs. So we carry a bunch of spark plug types. So there's going to be a number that you're going to have to reference to. There are some, these are laser spark plugs. Typically you can go on our website and say, okay, do I have a champion? What number does that represent through our laser? Most of them are pre-gap for that size, but you do want to make sure that you check the gapping on your spark plug. That way you're getting the proper ignition within the engine, and that can be eliminating 99% of your problems when it comes to firing the engine up. So lots of different ones, longer, shorter, fatter, wider. Just make sure you get the right ones. You don't want to be cross-threading this. Anybody that's worked on engines that cross-thread these, it's a nightmare, and you want to make sure you get the one that fits. If it's too long in the piston chamber, the piston can actually slap against the bottom electrode, and that's going to just go down a really bad path. So make sure it's the right one for the right engine. We also have tune-up kits that include a spark plug. Basically, it's going to come with a tune-up kit components. It's specific to certain models, so you would just have to do some research to say, okay, this one works with this engine. But we do carry a variety of different tune-up kits. And, this isn't something you may have to do yearly. This might be something every other year. It all just depends on the usage of your equipment. So if you're only using it a few times a year, you're probably not going to need to, do a lot of extracurricular maintenance on tune-up kits. But if you're using it as your daily, workload, you're definitely going to want to, make sure. Maybe you send that into a shop to do. But if you're comfy working on this equipment, it's no reason why you can't do some of your own tune-ups on some of the components. Supplying the fuel. So as our engines are outside, weather, heat, abuse, misuse, whatever that might look like, over time, storage, you know, components do wear out. Fuel lines, things like, you know, tins might start to fade, but fuel lines typically will crack over time or split. They may get clogged. So we carry fuel line kits, but we also carry fuel line in by the foot. And if you choose to buy that by the foot, try to use fuel line only. Don't, you know, substitute it with a, you know, PVC piping or tubing. That's not rated for fuel. These are rated. This one happens to come with a on-off cog. So, you know, if you want to jerry rig something up on your engine, and maybe you're using a larger tank and you're changing the way you supply the fuel, you know, buying a kit with some extra footage, and then maybe you've got an inline shutoff to, you know, stop that flow, and you can do some work on the carburetor system without having to drain everything. So fuel line's important. You'll notice right away. Big thing, if you do see leaks and cracks in your you know, your fuel lines, make sure you fix them right away, because that's going to be dripping probably close to where there's some hot exhaust, and that could catch fire, and it's just not good for the environment if your engine's leaking and your fuel consumption. So just keep that in mind. Try to use you know, the highest grade fuels to help prevent the clogging. So, you know, make sure your jerry cans, if you're adding fuel from a jerry can, make sure that there's no debris going in there, and you know, you're either doing the seasonal maintenance on them, swapping out the fuel, or adding some additives to prevent any kind of clogging, because it doesn't take much to clog these lines up, and then your engine's not going to perform the way you think it should. So fuel line, really good little option to have. It's only a few dollars. It's nice to have just in case if you do get an oopsie split or something catches on it. It's good to, you know, have a small portion of it. Speaking of fuel, we also carry some inline fuel filters. This is considered to be an inline fuel filter. Some of the models will have the fuel filter nested inside the tank, and that's a little harder to, you know, to change out, because you do have to actually take the tank off, reach up underneath, and then pull that out. But this one here is an inline, so we could add it to the fuel line, and super simple, couple little hose clamps, and you know, you can filter out. You know, if you're in the marine area, you know, you can use this to help prevent any kind of clogging. But you know, snow blowers, any major you know, addition with filters will just help your engine. But you also have to maintain them. There are filters out on the market that you can flush out, but they're so cheap that you just, you know, might as well start from scratch. So fuel filters inline are a really good option as an accessory to have. Again, with the fuel side of it, we do have some rebuild kits. So there are rebuild kits for your carburetor. Basically, the carburetor is the control mechanism for your fuel air, so your engine works. This is kind of like a heart. There's a lot going on in this little guy, and you know, if it's not working properly, it's just going to give you all kinds of troubles. And the number one reason why these things stop working properly is because of the lack of maintenance. Poor fuel conditions, not treating fuel, leaving it sit, maybe using fuel that's not appropriate for the engine. So really be mindful of you know, what fuels you're putting in and how you're treating it throughout the seasons. But if you do have issues with your carburetor, basically we do carry some carburetor replacements, full replacements like this in our store. They're also available through parts. You just need to know the model and that, because they're not always equal on all different units. So yeah, it's a really simple rebuild. You're going to get basically 2 bolts that you have to undo. It slides off. You're going to have some spacers. You're going to have a few little jetting screws. You're going to have to take a linkage off, just the throttle linkage, and you're going to have some seal kits that you'll need to want to replace. Just make sure that you remove the previous seal kit. If it's baked on or cooked on, you want to scrape that off, to get a nice finish on finish for the seals to prevent any kind of leaking. They're pretty much one way only, so the bolts will only allow you to put that on one way, so you don't have to worry about which way you orientate it. They're typically unidirectional. So just keep that in mind. If you're, you're concerned about your fuel and that, you can just undo a bolt on the carburetor. This is the bowl below here, and you'll just undo it. This bowl will come out. Expect some fuel to come out. There's a little float that pulsates back and forth. Make sure that that's flowing freely. If you leave fuel in these things, typically it'll start to go kind of like a turpentine color. You're going to get a different smell out of your fuel, and it can also dry up and turn into powder, and that's where it's going to start to clog your jetting up inside. And the jetting is simply a valve, a needle valve, that allows your atmosphere pressure to work with the air coming in and the amount of fuel going into your engine. So if that's not set properly, or if that's sticking, that's where you can run into hesitation, stalling, all of those things that would come along with improper delivery of your fuel air mixtures. So the carburetor is probably one of the hardest things to work on if you were to take this apart. It's pretty intricate. Sometimes it's just better to replace it or take it in for repair. Now, if it's a standard pull start, recoil start, you're constantly, turning that thing over when you need it to run. Ropes break, the pull breaks, and we carry, accessory cords for that. If you do break it, there's 3 or 4 bolts that hold the recoil on, and you just have to rewind it. There is a set of dogs inside that spin outwards on force that link to your drive shaft, and that's what starts the engine up. Then they slip back. You just have to be careful when you take that apart that there's a big spring in there, that it doesn't go boing, and now you have to rewind that. That takes a little bit of time to do, and if you don't get it in the right orientation, your recoil may not retract all the way, or it'll just kind of hang out. You got to kind of be careful when you get in there, because make sure that you know where things are to get it realigned properly. But these things break, they get a lot of wear and tear, especially if you're really having to pull them over, and we carry the replacements in a variety of different styles. When you're controlling your engine, so maybe you need a throttle cable system. So like on a lawnmower, you've got your throttle up here. Maybe you've got it on the side of your lawnmower. Maybe it's on a snowblower. Maybe it's on a go-kart. You've got a pedal. You need to be able to control the rate of speed of the engine a little bit more remotely. So we carry a few different designs of throttle cables. Some are pretty standard that you would see on many lawnmowers, that kind of stuff. But definitely the throttle cable allows us to control the throttle, the RPM on the engine more remotely. So there's a design like this, and we have a plastic design, something very similar that you'd see on a rabbit and a turtle, or a hare and a turtle. Rabbit for fast, turtle for slow, so you idle down. Again, you do have to have that RPM running at a certain RPM to do the work you require. So they have simple linkages that will just link into the throttle system on the engine. All right, so as we do our oil changes periodically, hopefully we're doing them, somewhat frequently. There are suggested rates of time to change your oil. When should I change it? Check with the manufacturer's booklet, the operator's manual. They can suggest so many hours typically of usage, and then maybe a yearly, 2 yearly. They sometimes give you kind of a forecast of when to change it. What I would suggest is which oil you're looking at, 5W30, 10W30. Typically they're gonna, most of us are gonna select the 10W30, but depending on the time of year, how cold it is, you may go down to the 5W30, or just check the engine manufacturer's suggested oil. Basically, what I do with my equipment After about 8 hours, if I bought this and I was to put this on a go-kart, this engine here, after about 8 hours of actual use, I would probably change the oil because of the wear and tear, just the break-in period of that engine. You may start to get a little bit more material just from the build, and you want to get rid of that. So about 8 hours, I typically will change the oil. And then depending on the seasonal product, so if it's a snowblower, if it's a lawnmower, or if it's something I'm using all year, like in a generator, for example, I'll change it about every 200 hours or so. But again, that's just something I've put on a schedule. That's entirely up to you, but check your manufacturer's recommendations so that you don't go too long. It's no different than if you drive a vehicle. You do want to do your oil changes because of issues within that engine. So don't have to change it all that often, but again, periodically just check with the operator's manual. So good way to buy our product. Just as a side note, if you do select an engine from us, there is no oil with the engine. The engine may have a little bit of oil in it just from the testing facility that they were at, but it doesn't come with oil in it, nor does it come with it in the box. So really be careful if you're just grabbing an engine and going. Quite often there's tags put on the oil dipsticks saying that there's no oil in. But sometimes we miss that, and we want to make sure that when you need that engine, you've got oil. Maybe you have some at home, but don't forget they do not come with oil, and you'll need to pick some up at some point. If you don't have any, why not purchase it from us? So just kind of ask a team member in the store where it is, and they'll help you, no problem. Now, my favorite accessory, if you've watched previous episodes, I can't speak enough about this product, SEAFOAM engine treatment. It's, I call it magic in a can. It's, lots of tests have been done. For me, I always add SEAFOAM to pretty much anything that I have that has fuel in it, whether it's a 2-stroke chainsaw, whether it's a 4-stroke, go-kart motor or lawnmower or whatever it looks like, outboard engines. You can add it to diesel if you want. But really, this is going to help prevent a lot of those maintenance issues that you'll see if you haven't done that maintenance. So it's going to help prevent, fuel from going bad, periodically, just adding this in. It'll clean out the carbon deposits that can develop inside your engine combustion chamber. It just lubricates the fuel system, and it prevents any kind of gelling in diesel. It's a wonderful product. It's cheap in comparison to having to go and replace something that you didn't do your maintenance on, especially when it comes to the fuel systems. So really, I can try not to add it directly into the tank, so don't pour it in. The only time I pour SEAFOAM directly in the tank is if I'm going to store it. So if I'm storing an engine, I will top up the fuel with my jerry can that already had some SEAFOAM in it, but I'll add some extra just so I can run that engine for a few minutes to get really anything kind of flushed out and cleaned out, and have all the components that fuel will touch inside the engine with SEAFOAM in it. So it'll help any kind of ice ups. So yeah, it's usually added to the jerry can. So if you've got a 5-gallon jerry can, how much do you add? Well, you could add the whole can if you wanted to. That gets pretty expensive, but definitely a third of this can, even less. It all depends on your fuel. If you're adding top of the line, high grade fuel that you can out of the pumps, which I would suggest for these engines you do, they run best that way. So 92 or whatever that is in your areas. I would suggest always using that fuel. If you do go with the lower grade, I would always add stabilizer, or in this case, SEAFOAM. So keep that in mind. They do run better with higher grade, less ethanol, the better. That's really what it boils down to. Well, that's it for Tech Tips with Mike T. We'll see you next time.